Hello and welcome back to Euro Football Daily, where today we're providing you with another one-on-one, this time on the potential of a European Super League. I'll seek to explain and analyse what it is, how it would work and what impact it could potentially have. Let's get into it. What is the European Super League? The concept of a European Super League for football's richest and most successful clubs is a concept that has been discussed since the 1990s. Regularly talked about and occasionally officially proposed, the idea hasn't come to fruition as of yet. In 1998, the plan almost became a reality, but UEFA managed to appease the super clubs' demands by expanding the Champions League and abolishing the Cup Winners' Cup. 11 years later, it reared its ugly head again when Florentino Perez, one of its biggest proponents down the years, criticised the current competition, saying, "We have to agree a new European Super League which guarantees that the best always play the best, something that doesn't happen in the Champions League." In 2016, UEFA finally discussed the possibility of creating a closed league containing the best 16 teams in European football from the highest ranked national leagues. More on that later, but in short the plan was rejected, and instead UEFA, in order to avoid the creation of an official Super League, made changes to the structure of the Champions League. They announced that for the cycle 2018 to 2021, England, Germany, Italy and Spain would have 4 teams in the Champions League without having to compete in the playoffs. Unbeknownst to the football world at the time, but later revealed by Football Leaks, officials from English clubs met in London in 2016 with American businessman Charlie Stillitano. Stillitano is the founder of the International Champions Cup and was sounded out to discuss the feasibility of a European Super League. Nothing substantial ever came from these talks, but the leaked emails show that the idea of a new league was far from axed. And just this month, the New York Times claims that Perez had once again met with FIFA President Gianni Infantino and club chiefs from across the continent. This meeting was strategically timed to coincide with discussions by football's governing bodies about the structure of the game from 2024 onwards. The basic idea behind the European Super League is that although the UEFA Champions League has been an enormous success, the group stage has become too predictable. In order to grow TV rights, there is a belief that the competition needs to see more of the continent's top teams face off more often. But as ever, the underlying objective by these super clubs is to create more money for their own, well-stocked coffers. Many of these European clubs have looked enviously over at the success of the Premier League, where, according to Deloitte, the clubs made a record £4.8 billion in revenue in 17-18, 72% more than its nearest competitor, the Bundesliga, and they want a slice of it. Just before we go any further, just a quick reminder to subscribe to Euro Football Daily and hit that notification bell to never miss a one-on-one. So how would this potential league work? German magazine Der Spiegel had previously published confidential documents and emails alleging that Real Madrid were working on a 16 Super League to kick off in 2021 back in 2016, as I mentioned earlier. This would effectively make the Champions League obsolete and operate outside the control of UEFA. This was reportedly supported by the European Club Association, or ECA, a body that represents the interests of professional football clubs across UEFA. According to The Telegraph, the plan called for 11 clubs from Spain, England, Germany, Italy and France to get ownership stakes and risk-free Super League membership for 20 years, with 5 more clubs from these countries invited to play. The original 11 would be Barcelona, Real Madrid, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City, Man United, Juventus, AC Milan, PSG and Bayern Munich. The leaked documents published by Der Spiegel claim that they plan to register a company to organise the European Super League, of which they would be permanent members for 20 years, ineligible for relegation. In addition to these core founding members, they would then be joined by 5 more guests on a rotating basis: Atletico Madrid, Borussia Dortmund, Inter Milan, Roma and Marseille. But this didn't get very far. As we said, UEFA responded to this undercover move by agreeing what they called a Memorandum of Understanding with the ECA. They said that they plan to continue to work together with mutual trust and clarity of objectives to ensure the well-being and stability of European football. This was basically UEFA worried about the demise of the Champions League, telling the ECA to get back in line. But the plan to alter the structure of European competition hasn't gone away. Whilst Real Madrid and the ECA's plans has been rejected, UEFA are working on a new format for the 2024-25 season onwards. This would involve a Champions League of 32 teams, a Europa League of 32 teams and a Europa League 2 of 64 teams, with a maximum number of 5 teams from the same national league per competition. So far, this doesn't sound that revolutionary, but it would still have a knock-on effect on football as we know it. First of all, instead of 8 groups of 4 teams playing in the autumn, they would be expanded to 4 groups of 8, so that instead of participating clubs playing 6 games before Christmas, they would instead play 14. Now, throwing that amount of games into the calendar doesn't come without consequences. The Football Supporters Federation rightly point out that it would have massive ramifications. In England alone, the League Cup would likely be scrapped, the FA Cup would become primarily a midweek competition without replays, and the FSF hypothesised that the Premier League would have to be reduced in size to 18 or even 16 clubs, with a knock-on effect of how many clubs are promoted from the Championship each season. There is even talk that these European games, particularly those in the restructured top tier, would take place at the weekend, pushing Premier League fixtures to midweek, destroying the traditional fabric of weekend league football throughout Europe in the process. Not only that though, but once the initial membership of the new Champions League is established, then there'd be promotion and relegation of 8 teams from the 32 at the end of each season. 4 of these places would be filled by the semi-finalists of the Europa League, meaning only 4 teams throughout Europe would be rewarded on the strength of their domestic performance. With the English sides unlikely to finish outside the top 24 and face relegation, there would be a very slim prospect of any other English sides ever getting promoted. You'd imagine this would be the same in Spain with Real, Barcelona and Atleti, and in Germany with Bayern, Dortmund and Leipzig. Rather than punishing Europe's elite clubs for one-off poor seasons like Chelsea under Mourinho or Arsenal this campaign, this new structure would make sure the established elite remain at the top, taking away the fairness of football. But will these changes actually happen? Well, not if German Football League president Reinhard Rubel has anything to do with it. Speaking back in June, the 72-year-old, who is also president of Borussia Dortmund and vice president of the German Football Association, said that the original ECA proposals could destroy national leagues. And Alexander Ceferin, the UEFA president, has moved to calm fears over the ECA's proposal, saying a closed European Super League is simply not possible with us. He even goes on to say that UEFA has never considered a competition reserved to a handful of powerful clubs selected on the basis of their history, brand and renown, cutting themselves off from the rest of the system. But even his plans to reform European competition will make it incredibly difficult for sides outside the established and largest names to force their way into the Champions League. The ECA's proposal for a closed-off European Super League may not happen, but Ceferin and UEFA's proposal isn't a million miles away. Unsurprisingly, the Premier League is one of the biggest losers if the new system is introduced. The lucrative television deal which currently bankrolls the competition will likely be drawn to the shiny new tournament, which will feature at least 4 of England's biggest clubs, and the Premier League's financial superiority will likely evaporate. But whilst the league is against it, some of the top 6 have different feelings. In August 2019, Liverpool chairman and co-owner Tom Werner was interviewed and said, "I don't want to participate in anything that in any way harms the experience from both the Liverpool supporters' point of view and also in terms of the primacy of English football." But the public and private attitude of the top clubs is likely to be quite different, especially when a brand new lucrative competition which will supersede the current Champions League is on the table. And so it proved. The Independent reported that when the representatives of the top 6 flew to Malta in June for an EFA meeting, Werner didn't even make it, and apparently the English club's opposition to the changes was at best lukewarm. These potential changes couldn't have come at a worse time for the Premier League either, with both the executive and chairman roles vacant since the retirement of Richard Scudamore last year. At a time when the richest league in the world needs direction over this matter, the leadership positions at the top remain vacant. But these potential changes are something that should concern all of us. You might think, say, if you're a supporter of Bournemouth, Bologna or Hertha Berlin that cares very little for the fortunes of Liverpool, Juventus or Dortmund, good riddance, see you later. Your departure from our national leagues will make them more competitive. But sadly, it wouldn't work like this. With the prospect of Champions League games being played at the weekends, the current blackout of televised matches at 3 p.m. on a Saturday will become a thing of the past, meaning that all down the pyramid, clubs will be competing against televised European football. Their tiny slice of the TV rights pie will therefore be further reduced, putting even more pressure on clubs the length and breadth of the country. Champions League revenue is already the biggest factor disrupting the competitiveness of the Premier League, and the ECA/UEFA reforms will only exaggerate these effects. According to the FSF in 1819, the Championship shared £72.6 million, League One clubs £16.3 million and League Two clubs £10.9 million of the Premier League's TV income. The loss of this money could create more situations like those of Bury and Bolton, not just in England but throughout Europe. And it's not like the Champions League needs a major revamp. Last year's competition, in which Ajax reached the semi-finals, the favourites Barcelona and Man City failed to make the final, and Liverpool and Spurs completed awesome comebacks to reach the showpiece, was one of the best in living memory. So to conclude, the proposed changes to European football from 2024, whilst not the closed-off league that the ECA originally proposed, could still fundamentally alter the traditional football calendar and bankrupt smaller clubs throughout Europe. I understand that the biggest clubs in Europe aren't happy about being left behind on and off the pitch by the financial juggernaut that is the Premier League, with 4 English clubs contesting the finals of both the Europa League and Champions League in 2019. But sacrificing the structure of football throughout Europe and of the very successful Champions League to satisfy the agenda and accounts of Europe's elite doesn't seem right at all. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on the potential changes to European football that could be introduced from 2024. If you enjoyed this video, go check out our Ballon d'Or video done by Patrick van Straten just a few weeks ago. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like it, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye!